Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Your Favorite X-Men podcast, where every episode I have a conversation with a guest about their favorite X-Men character. If you want to support this channel project, the best way to do it is by subscribing and engaging. But with that out of the way, today I'm joined by Jake, who is at StealThisPlanet on Twitter, which is of course a fun reference to the New Mutants Annual number 1 from all the way back in 1984. I highly recommend you follow him. He makes great X-Men analysis threads that I've thoroughly enjoyed. And with that said, Jake, would you do us the honor of introducing who your favorite X-Men character is?
Yeah, hi Ryan. So, my favourite character is at times a mutant team leader, at other times a depowered mutant leader, a teacher, a legal guardian, an undercover agent, and at times a Valkyrie. I'm of course talking about Dani Moonstar, aka Mirage.
You know, Shakespeare said that in one man's time he can play many parts, and I think you've illustrated that with Dani and how over her comic book history she's had many different roles. But before we get started, just some foundational questions for you too, really. How did you get into X-Men comics, and then why was Dani a character that stood out to you among the wide variety of mutant characters?
Yeah, sure. So my kind of journey with the X-Men started with the animated show. I think in the UK we had kind of late reruns of it on a show called Live and Kicking on a Saturday morning. And then from there, me and my brother both really loved the sort of team dynamic and the kind of scale and the size of the lore. And we bought trading cards, top trumps cards, learned all the stats. And then when the X-Men movies came out, that was when we really started buying comics. And my first full run was Astonishing X-Men, which I look back on slightly differently now, but I think is probably a good jumping on point. And then sort of moved away from comics for quite a long time until 5 or 6 years ago, where me and my brother were clearing out our bedroom in my mum's house, and we came across all of our old comics. We just sort of picked them up and started reading again. And then from there, we kind of just went on this shared experience of just reading everything and anything that we didn't have the chance to read when we were younger. And I came to sort of House of X Powers of 10, maybe about a year or so after it was published. My brother started moving in sort of Spider-Man direction. I wasn't reading as much X-Men. I thought at that point I've got to set up a Twitter account. I need people to talk to about this, and that's really kind of lit the flames of my fandom again. I think the last few years have just been incredible, really.
Yeah, it's funny. The desire to want to engage after reading the X-Men books is something I feel very strongly about too. And I always laugh because I basically started my Twitter as a way to network and boost my playwriting endeavors. And I feel poorly for the playwrights and theater artists who have followed me and maybe since unfollowed me, because now I use it just exclusively for entering X-Men and comic book discourse.
Yeah, it's all consuming. It really is, especially at the moment where every line on the franchise is just so good, and there's just so much to talk about. And the Krakoan experiment is so thought-provoking in many ways, sort of perfectly imperfect, which makes it kind of rich territory to discuss. And yeah, I really enjoyed that part of it.
It's always super interesting to hear that someone found their way into the X-Men comics or comics in general through the animated series, and I've only seen a few episodes of that, and they were great, but it seems like it has done so much legwork for getting people involved in Marvel's Merry Mutants, so kudos to that animated series, and hopefully X-Men 97 has a similar effect, and we get a bunch of new fans. And then similarly, I always hear, probably because it's just a common life thing, but people dropping out of comics because just things in their life get in the way. But it seems like a lot of people also found their way back into things because House of X, Powers of X reinvigorated a lot of X-Men passion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a really nice, fresh start, I think, and a great jumping on point. And yeah, I'd read some Hickman stuff when I was younger, and as soon as I sort of saw his name on the bottom of that book, I just picked it up immediately, read it all in one day, and then I was absolutely hooked from then on.
And so moving on and actually putting the spotlight on Dani, I would love to hear your thoughts on the partnership of Dani and Sam, aka Cannonball for those who don't know, during that original New Mutants run, because I always thought it was interesting that they're labeled in the book as co-captains, because while I think Sam is very capable and he has leadership merits himself, I always got the sense reading it that Dani was the real focal character and kind of the real captain of that book, and it always was just kind of more intuitive to her. So I'm curious what your opinion opinion on that aspect of the group and their dynamic is?
Yeah, I think they contrast really well. So I think in the very first issue, almost their first interaction with Xavier and the rest of the mutants, Danny is immediately skeptical and incredibly sort of unsure about joining Xavier's school, whereas Cannonball signs straight up to the Donald Pierce experiment, no questions asked, and goes along with it. And then when they finally do sort of come back together, they struggle in different ways. I think Danny really struggles mentally, and I kind of read her experiences in the first few issues as being very social, anxiety driven, not knowing quite how to assimilate into a group of people who've come from different cultures, but primarily to her sort of feel white American. Whereas Sam kind of fits straight into that mold. It's sort of a lot more familiar to him, but he struggles with sort of self confidence issues as well. And then, as is always the case with New Mutants, it's sort of building of empathy across time. But whereas I think Sam stays maybe a little bit static in his character, his sort of maturity comes through his relationship with Lila Cheney. Danny has to do the real hard yards, I think, and her sort of struggling to take control of her power, and the effects that has on others really kind of leads her into a spiral of depression, really. Especially when in issue 3, I think it is, when the Brood sort of really plays with her mind and says to her, you're never going to be able to fit in here. Your power is a danger to others. You're a danger to others. And then she really kind of goes through a journey of her power's going to come to the fore, and she starts to control them when Karma's life is under threat, and you think that she's mastered it, and then the trauma of her parents' death kind of reappears in the Demon Bear story, and that sort of learning point, and the fact that it's the rest of the team that saves her and props her up and makes her feel more kind of integrated with the group and more confident in herself is really the perfect kind of leader's journey, I think. Hard fought and hard won. And I think Sam does naturally defer to her from there. And I always found it curious. I think it was just sort of announced that they were co-leaders at some point. But for me, I think that the first 20 issues, excluding the Magic story, is all Dani. It's all about her journey to becoming the leader in the group. From both a tactical perspective, I came across a bit in the end of, I think, issue 22, where it's Xavier's father on Dani, and he says that she has sort of as much tactical nous as Cyclops does, but she's also very much the empathetic leader in the group as well. I really think she fulfills both functions. That's not to denigrate Sam at all. I think a great character and obviously a lovely boy. But yeah, that story really feels like, to me, like it sets up Dani as the leader of that team, and it's a really natural fit, I think.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And 2 thoughts from me on all that. First, I don't think Claremont always knocks it out of the park when it comes to his representation of minority characters. Like, I applaud the effort that he makes them and inserts them in his stories, but I think sometimes he leans into cultural stereotypes like he does with Dani in ways. But I do love that there are layers here to her skepticism and anger, like you mentioned, when she feels like she's being pawned off to the Xavier Institute, since there's, historical precedent that should be clear, but it's also just worth mentioning that for a while in history, Native American children would just be shipped off forcibly to boarding schools in an effort to kind of cruelly get them to assimilate. So I totally understand Dani's hesitance there. And then the second thing, in regards to her trauma that sprouts from her powers and her having to face them and her fear of them, I had the benefit of being a new X-Men fan reading all of these books in the past 2.5 years. So I've been reading classic and modern stuff kind of together, and it's really nice for me to have seen how Dani has grown from those original years, because I was always surprised when I started reading that New Mutants run and how it focused on some of the darker parts of adolescence. Like, that wasn't necessarily the path I thought the book would follow, but I really like it, and it especially is elevated when Bill Sienkiewicz adds his artwork. But just seeing her today, owning her power, and having remedied a lot of those issues she had internally with assimilation and whatnot, it's great. Especially having seen her in that original run where there's a few moments where Dani, I think, has even considered killing herself because of the stress and anguish caused from her powers.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is all over that. It's the question of, is this a kind of project, or is this an ethos that she agrees with? And yeah, she doesn't have to assimilate, and she sort of weighs those 2 options up. Are these people whose cause I believe in, and she takes that approach with with very much everything. It's the same with Valkyrie stuff. She kind of jumps straight into the heroism and then sort of questions her place in this kind of preordained mythos, and that, that there's the kind of struggles that she wrestles with. I think on the point of the sort of the darkness of adolescence, that's what I really love about it. I think one of the things that always kind of draws people back to stories about teenagers is kind of reading it with the benefit of hindsight and thinking about how you might have done things differently. And for me, with Dani, there's a lot of, I don't know, she's incredibly relatable to me from the social anxiety kind of perspective, and coming into new situations and not always saying the right thing, which is kind of symbolized through her powers, especially in the situation with Karma, where her trauma is kind of brought back up again. And I think that's why I really love the original run. And I think, as you say, Sienkiewicz's art just gives it a kind of abstractness that really adds to the kind of almost dream trauma state that the New Mutants continually seem to go through. Although I think it's been refreshing, and for the most part in Vita Ayala's run, that's dealt with a little bit more sensitively. I think in Claremont's run there is a temptation, I think he said this before, that he loves to put his favourite characters through the worst situations and the most trauma possible. And the poor New Mutants, sort of 40 years on, have gone through a hell of a lot. And Vita's recent issues have been great in kind of just showing the bonds that are forged through that darkness. And that's why I love their run so much. I'm really sad that it's ended.
Yeah, I'm actually 2 issues behind right now, but it's been very, very good, and I was very sad to hear it's ending. But I'm sure the next creative team will do a good job with what Vita has built up with Rice as well.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
That was such a refreshing New Mutants run, and from loving the source material, it has been great that they really, and this is kind of the X-Office in general at the moment, but it's very, very cognitive of the past history of the characters, and they'll play around with the past arcs and what the core of the characters are, and I've just been really appreciating that, especially in Vita's run, although I guess it's been a bit more magic focused overall than Dani.
Definitely lately, yeah.
I feel like, so I will preface, I love Magic. I think she's a great character, but I feel like it's almost a missed opportunity in a way that Magic has soaked up the spotlight most of anyone from the original New Mutants run, and I really would have liked somewhere out there to be a part of the universe where things played out differently and Dani's stories also got to intersect with other X titles. But sort of with all that said, if she were to get more focused in the future, which I hope she does, I really thought maybe it was just a dream, but I thought she'd make it onto the latest iteration of the X-Men team, but that didn't play out. But so in the future, what path would you like to see that character follow? Like, how do you think she could be best used, considering everything she's been through?
Yeah, so I think there's a problem that exists on Krakoa at the moment, and it's a kind of widening chasm between what you might call the elite of the Quiet Council, the really kind of established figures whose primary responsibility and focus is to preserve Krakoa, preserve what they have at all costs. And what books like Sabretooth in particular, and then The Way of X into Legion of X run by Cy Spurrier is showing is that there are lots of mutants who are being left behind. One of the earlier New Mutants runs, issues of this run, you see, for example, Gabby Kinney dying because there's not enough attention paid, and the Shadow King's influence starts to grow and starts to kind of corrupt these kids. And what I feel like the Quiet Council is really missing is a representative of the non-combative mutants, that your average mutant on Krakoa, of which there are many, thousands. And I feel like that's a role that Dani could play. And I think she'd not only represent them, but she'd also challenge the oligarchy almost of the Quiet Council at the moment, where you've got these really established figures making decisions for everybody else. But I think the other thing that I'd like to see Dani do, and this doesn't happen that often with Dani's stories, is I'd actually like her to make a mistake, to do something wrong. I feel that there aren't many examples in her character history of her making a decision that has a negative impact on others. She's an amazing leader. And that's one of the things I love about her as a character, but I think you've got to be careful with kind of conflating liking a character as a fictional person and then being an interesting character. And what I really like to see explored a bit further with Dani is that she won't get it right all the time. And one of the things that Vita did in one of their earlier issues is she is spread so thin, trying to take care of Rain, trying to help Karma work through her issues, and then also look after the Lost Club. And she does drop the ball. She drops the ball with Cosmar, who then sort of runs off the Shadow King. And I think that's a really interesting character beat for Danny. It didn't get picked up on and explored further. But I think those two things in combination, I'm not saying I wanted to go to the Quiet Council and completely mess it up, of course not. But I think those two things working in combination with one another would make a really interesting Danny story for Noah.
Yeah, and to their credit there, I recall Dani, at least when they, make things right, Dani owns up to the mistake that she made in that moment at sort of dismissing Cosmer, which is really nice to see, especially when there's an array of more arrogant mutants living on Krakoa that may not have owned up to a mistake like that. So I appreciate that from Dani, and sort of that's a great segue into your comments on the Quiet Council because, you mentioned this earlier actually, and I think it's a great way to think of Krakoa, imperfect and full of flaws, but that's what makes the storytelling really interesting. I think a lot of people who are critical of the era they're not on the same page that it's not supposed to be presented entirely as this utopian society. It's supposed to be like a flawed bureaucracy in a sense. And that's what's exciting for a lot of us, at least. I think there's very few people who are blindly just like, yes, Krakoa is perfect. Like everything about it is great. I mean, it quite literally can't be with some of the certain members who are sitting on the Quiet Council, especially the way just like bureaucracy works with the Quiet Council. But I think that's a great thought. Like Dani's morality, her intelligence, her leadership skills, and even her power set to some degree, with all of that in mind, she would be a great advocate for mutant kind. And that'd be an awesome direction for them to go in, and sort of in a similar vein than when Hope Summers joined the Quiet Council. Like the Five essentially unionizing has been a really fun part of their current storyline. So seeing something like that with Dani would be cool too. And just in general, I think it'd be great to see some of the actually. So is Dani actually a war captain right now, or is she just sort of helping out with some of those responsibilities?
No, I don't think she's a war captain. I'd like to think she's Magic's second at least, but she seems to be the one that Ileana always calls in. But no, I think she's just sort of the functional leader of the New Mutants team, and almost it feels like the support mechanism for Rain, who takes up I'm sure an enormous amount of emotional energy to deal with, but also the fantastic story with Karma where she asked Dani to sort of fight her in the Crucible as a way of kind of breaking that cycle of trauma. And with all of these stories, they're the great stories, and Dani plays a great role in them because of her empathy and all the qualities that we've outlined. But yeah, what about Dani? Well, what does Dani want? We can kind of come up with these ideas for potential storylines for her, and we're kind of doing that from a point of almost nothing, because we've not heard about what she wants yet. And I think I'd really like to see that focus. I'm not complaining too much because I think I've loved every issue so far. But as a sort of Dani champion, yeah, I think it'd be just great to find out what she wants out of the Krakoan experiment.
Yeah, and that sort of makes me think back to that kind of era where she was depowered after the events of House of M with the Scarlet Witch. And I have not read too much of depowered Dani stuff, and I know a few of the things that you had recommended feature more depowered Dani storylines. And so I'm sort of curious because I from each of the runs you sent me, I've read a portion of them essentially, but I'm kind of curious what you think or what have extrapolated as what Dani wanted during that time period, like with those things stripped away from her, I know what kind of role she took on and was also pushed away from at some points, but just sort of what path was she following then? Like, is there any hints about where the character could go in the future from there?
Yeah, so something that the depowered era is one of my favourite Dani eras. I mean, the first appearance of Dani in Zeb Wells' run is she's in jail. I can't remember why she's in jail, but she's in jail, and Legion tries to break her out, who's sort of the functional antagonist for that story, and Sam's saying, no, you can't come, you can't help us, and Dani just absolutely won't take that. She's absolutely not prepared to sort of sit back and watch while her friends and teammates kind of try and take on this threat without her. And she says something like, I need to be of use. And that's sort of really instructive as to her kind of dedication after the initial skepticism towards the preservation of mutant safety as much as anything else. She gets out of prison cell and she beats Sam up basically, and again, not textually, but certainly implicitly takes the role of leader from him. And then in the latter part of that series, in the Abnett and Lanning part, she takes the New Mutants away from Utopia and into a house in San Francisco, and you see the New Mutants kind of, to a certain degree, becoming part of a human community, which is interesting, especially as Dani's role as a depowered mutant. But their role is, as decreed by revolutionary leader Cyclops at the time, is to sort of clean up the messes that the X-Men either can't be bothered or aren't able to solve, and that was all led by Dani, that kind of cultural shift away from kind of mutant utopia as it was at the time. And I wonder, because it was literally called Utopia, and there's a certain level of irony to that, but it does draw parallels to Krakoa at least at first. And I guess all utopias start off as this perfect society and then tend to crumble. Yeah, whether there's something like that, whether she feels that this kind of utopian vision is the right thing for all mutants, and if post the events of Judgment Day and seeing where mutants are in the kind of human relationship, whether that might be something that she explores further, kind of taking mutants who aren't perhaps getting the most out of Krakoa away from that situation and helping them to thrive in a different environment. I think that would be interesting, certainly. And the other notable thing in that run is that she gets her Valkyrie powers back, and that again is really interesting. And she's sort of used again by Scott to kind of barter with Hela to give her those powers back in exchange for some evil kind of return favor in the future. And that she will do that. And even as a depowered mutant, she will do that despite being sacked by Emma Frost as a teacher at the academy. She will kind of put herself on the line for the mutants. And I think that kind of says it all about Dani as a character, that she will do anything, even if it goes against the status quo or the current way of thinking. And that's one of the reasons that she's probably my favorite character.
Yeah, definitely. So are you kind of thinking that she would be, and I feel like the current status quo of Krakoa hasn't leaned into this too much, but are you sort of thinking that she'd be a good representative for kind of, bridging some relations between humanity and mutants as well?
I think she would be. I guess the question is more, is that actually appropriate now? Is that something that is has been tried before and is just prone to failure because mutants will never be accepted by humans? I think if anyone could do it, I think Dani could do it. I think she would, in that situation, question whether or not that is the right course of action, or whether that does kind of dilute the Krakoan promise too much. But then, at some point in the future, that might look completely different. And as the walls start to crumble down in the shape of probably a certain Mr. Essex, those kinds of avenues might be necessary. And I think she would be a great representative of Krakoa in that.
I don't know if they've interacted much in the past, and I can't really recall an interaction between them, but I would love just to witness Dani, spout some rhetoric off to Mr. Sinister and kind of give him a piece of her mind, because she was really wonderful in that issue of the Vita's New Mutant series where they were kind of just debating with the Shadow King. Like, it was just an ideological battle that was really, really fun to witness. And I would like to see something like that from her. I think she could be a good person to, give a talk to a few mutants on the island, actually. So
she would, yeah. It'd be like that scene in Airplane where everyone's kind of queuing up to take their I can't remember which passenger it is, but they're all queuing up essentially to attack this passenger. I think that the queue would be the length of Krakoa for Mr. Sinister there, but Dani certainly would give him a piece of her mind.
And it's definitely a good question that you're sort of posing about whether that bridge is appropriate for Krakoa, given what the promise of it was and everything. And I'm so intrigued on the longevity of this era and where Krakoa can go and where the resurrection protocols and all that can go. And sort of, I'm wondering if ever, once they become more established, however they determine that, once they achieve some of whatever goals they have in mind, once they maybe figure out a more appropriate, more democratic system of government that isn't so shady and isn't so self-imposed, if they will ever open up the island to others, and what kind of effect that would have on things, and if that would, create a split, a divide, and just sort of put us back where we started, but basically in a new light.
Yeah, I think it could be a, kind of the Asgardian, as Asgard is not a place, it's a people type thing, where Krakoa becomes the sort of the spiritual home of mutants, but not the only habitat in which they can live and thrive. And whether it will become a sort of, I think it's set up. Unless it all gets completely destroyed, could be wrong. Could find out in 3 weeks' time that it has. But it's, I think it's well set up to become a sort of kind of geographical powerhouse. But that doesn't necessitate everybody living there. And I think at a certain point, they might mature to that level of statehood where you do have expats and you do have people from elsewhere coming in. I have my doubts. Just certain characters in the mix who have got a lot of power at the moment, I don't think would be happy with that. And I think history would suggest that they should treat that with extreme caution. But certainly, the idea of it becoming a home base for mutants to feel safe and protected if they need to, but then have the opportunity to explore opportunities elsewhere. I think that would be great. Don't know how rich it would make the storytelling part of it, but the part of me that wants kind of mutant happiness, that satisfies that side of it at least.
Yeah, I've said it on a few different episodes of this and it's great to hear from the people who are consuming these books that we're all just rooting for the mutants to catch a break and just be able to live their best lives. But I've said often that it'd be wonderful, and in this era especially is the perfect time for it, if we just got a book that was focused on, just kind of day-to-day mutant interactions, interpersonal relationship type stuff. You can throw some drama in there. I mean, half the reason I tune into X-Men books is for the drama and those dynamics among the team, but I would love to see something like that. There would be somewhat of a desire for that maybe if it was done successfully enough, because anytime we get just, friendly interactions or, nice character moments, they're all over X Twitter.
Oh yeah, yeah. Any bar scene in the Green Lagoon is, immediately sort of who's there, who's talking to who. It really is that level. Yeah, I would love to see that as well. I think even a shifting focus, really, just the sort of day-to-day life, really in soap opera style. I'm thinking specifically kind of British soaps like EastEnders and Coronation Street, where it's just like what's happening in the town, who's sleeping with who, and who's had a fight in the local pub on a Friday night type stuff. I'd be all in for that. I really would. I'd love to read it, and maybe that's what the Infinity comics are for to a certain degree, but something. And I don't have the solution, but something, with more of a kind of defined focus in a run would be amazing. And I think the people who are currently buying X books, I'd be surprised if many people would drop that kind of thing. So there'd be a captive audience, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've read the recent Leah Williams Exterminators yet, but even
Yes.
so the introduction to that issue is basically just a girls' night out. It's almost in the vein of, I even think the arc or whatever might be titled something similar to, Claremont's original Ladies' Night issue. And, I enjoyed that book wholeheartedly throughout, but I was particularly really enjoying just, seeing how they interact with each other and seeing the kind of relationships they've cultivated over the year and how that expresses itself on page. Like, that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, with those three, it was always going to descend into chaos in some form, vampire-related chaos. Not even, it wouldn't even need to be that level of supernatural. Yeah, it was always going to kind of turn into drama. And yeah, I agree. I absolutely loved that. And kind of going slightly off experts, one of my favourite Jonathan Hickman issues is in Fantastic Four, where it's Johnny Storm and Peter Parker go out and get on the town and just sort of let it fly and just kind of go crazy. And I'd love to see more of that, and different combinations, different characters with different, such a kind of rich history between them. The tension is kind of created just by them being in the same scene in some cases.
And that's part of my appeal to the original New Mutant series as well, along with everything else. I mean, that series is just phenomenal in so many ways, but I really enjoyed that, we got so many nice little moments of them also just being teenagers. Like, yes, there were so many moments where they were in dire straits and, everything seemed cataclysmic around them, but we also got just tons of really nice moments where they got the chance to just interact with each other, go to the mall, even there's that issue that is Dani focused where she revisits her hometown. Brightwind brought her there, and she's just sort of walking around the mall, sort of debating like that she loves the fact that there's a mall and there's shopping and she's entertained by that, but it's sort of at the cost of, where she's thinking it's at the cost of like part of her culture being sort of stripped away, and she's just having a crisis of identity there. And just even like reflective issues like that are really, really nice and always stand out to me among other issues in series. So something with that kind of focus would be great too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of the issue where he's taken by Magneto to the Hellfire Club, and they're trying their best to act proper under the circumstances, and Doug ends up getting drunk and sort of disgracing himself and everyone around him. Love stuff like that. And yeah, the new music was great for that. Great levity, and that's a kind of key component that I think has been a through line in the recent run, and will continue to be from what I've seen in the next couple of issues coming out. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will pivot back to Dani with sort of a fun question that I like to ask all my guests, and it's even more hyper specific with Dani actually, and more relevant. But I love how Dani incorporates part of her culture into her base New Mutant school uniform. It's also just like a smart way to showcase that while she's taken the steps to be an active and willing participant of like the Xavier Institute, despite her fears, she's not willing to budge on her cultural beliefs diminishing as a result of that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of her outfits over time, and do you have one you like to see her in best, whether it means something as a metaphor for the character intentionally, or even something that just looks the coolest on her? I always felt with her, more so than some other characters, there's a lot more informed designing going on there,
Exactly for the reasons that you've outlined, the simplicity of just customizing the New Mutants uniform with Cheyenne symbols is just perfect. I think the headband is iconic. The belt, which makes an appearance in the most recent New Mutants issue, I won't spoil that for you. I think that really just sums her up perfectly. I think the modern redesign, crack era redesign of that is perfect. It just kind of brings it a little bit more up to date. It makes it a little bit more culturally accurate as well. The other one is probably the MLF undercover agent era. Nothing about the outfit, just except the fact that she has a sort of bandana style mask across her face. I just think it looks really cool. I think it makes a massive statement about the fact that she's a character who was missing from continuity for so long, out of story, but then in story as well, as kind of missing from people's lives. And that era of X-Force where her being a secret agent is the worst kept secret imaginable, because she just goes by Moonstar is another one that I really like. But I really wouldn't change from a costume perspective. One of my favorite things about New Mutants from a kind of art perspective is how cool they look in street clothes in the 80s especially. And Dani always had really good looks as part of that. It's a shame that she completely lost the fashion sense for the Academy X era. It doesn't look too fashionable in that. But yeah, I think the more kind of the simple New Mutants uniform customization is just perfect.
Okay, and so you mentioned the Mutant Liberation Front, which reminded me that it's something I wanted to ask you about. So I read the key X-Force issues that you asked me to read for this, and I think I'm missing some context. Like, I gather that she's a double agent there and is sabotaging their plans internally, but I don't know, could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
I think, honestly, I'm not sure if someone in editorial just forgot that she existed for a bit. But no, they embed her in the Liberation Front to essentially provide intel about their plans to Cable. And there's a couple of key interventions. The intervention with Feral in particular, although that doesn't end up really saving the day, is an example of her kind of breaking her cover. And then there's one in where the Mutant Liberation Front take over a factory that's producing mutant cure vaccines, effectively, as far as I can remember. And she totally breaks her cover there because that everyone's kind of lives are in danger, and then she calls an X-Force to come and save the day. So that was the function of it. But she, again, true to form, had really set herself up as the second in command to either Strife initially or Rainfire subsequently, and sort of led the team. And it was really interesting in the issue where she departs the Mutant Liberation Front. Forearm in particular is very sore about it. I think he had possibly fallen in love with her over the course of their time together, and it's quite hard to tell actually. I probably need to read the issue again whether or not there's any kind of reciprocation from Dani. I don't think there is, but that would be a really fun interaction. I'd like to see a couple of panels on Uncle Terror actually, see if Forearms managed to forgive her for that betrayal, and then once she's sort of back in the fold, she's part of the road trip era team of X-Force, which is great. From a story perspective, I don't think it advances anything at all. It's all about character development and fun. She helps Warpath confront the trauma of his childhood by dreamcasting him back into his childhood home, which is great. And this was picked up on in the Giant Size Thunderbird issue, I think, as well. The recent one. And yeah, she kind of takes that particular era off a little bit, which is a great look because she's a bit more relaxed than usual because Siren's in charge. It's good fun. It's good fun. Not I wouldn't say essential for her character history, but just another kind of hat that she wears really well, both undercover agent and just sort of team member who supports everybody else.
Well, I really want to check out more of that stuff because right now, I don't know if you've read like the original Thunderbolts run by Busiek. Well, there's kind of a lot of parallels between the two stories and like the undercover nature aspect of it, but they're almost paralleled in an opposite way, really, where, you know, Dani is infiltrating a terrorist organization, and whereas the Thunderbolts are villains who are masquerading as heroes with one actual hero having infiltrated. But I always feel I have to bring this up when we're discussing the New Mutants. It's kind of like a New Mutants elephant in the room. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on the live action interpretation of Dani Moonstar in that New Mutants movie, if you've seen it.
I've seen it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first of all, the film is just terrible. The characterization of Dani. So she's incredibly meek for a start.
Yeah.
So her first reaction is to cower rather than to kind of challenge and rebel. She straight off the bat, not same character effectively. Her relationship with magic is way off as well for obvious reasons for anyone who's seen it. And yeah, the fact that you know her kind of moment of heroism is to stand up to the demon bear is it kind of falls so flat because it doesn't build up any of the history whatsoever, really. The one aspect is the relationship with Rain, I think, that's a real positive to come out. I'm more of a Karma and Dani person myself, but that was a great story. Well, I would say it's a great story, but it's a great idea to have that story amongst other terrible stories. But yeah, not the best, not the best.
I had no interest in that movie when it originally came out, but I was reading the New Mutants comics when I think it got like uploaded to HBO Max or whatever, whenever it became available for streaming. I was really excited to check it out because I was like, this movie is going to be great. Like I've heard about it and I've heard what kind of tone they're going with. And it seems like all the correct elements were there in a way and they could make it work, but then they just didn't at all. Like they were very, and you know, when it comes to comic book movies, I'm not like a source material elitist in any sense, but I feel like for this movie, there was like a pretty big disregard and almost disrespect of the source material for essentially all of the characters. I don't think Dani got the worst end of the shtick there, and I'm glad they made her the focal character. But yeah, she definitely didn't seem like the Dani that I knew and loved reading that original New Mutants run. I think Magic kind of gets the worst rep from that movie and is just terribly racist for some reason, but
Yeah, they made her the focus of the movie and then did a complete character assassination on her. Yeah. I mean, she doesn't drive the plot, but I think she's definitely the kind of scene stealer, isn't she?
yeah, and I don't even remember the way that movie ended, to be honest, because I think I just wiped it from my mind because it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go. But I think the climax is just between Magic and the Demon Bear, right?
Yeah, it is, which I guess is not actually too far removed from the source material. But considering the as I say, very meek characterization of Dani, it doesn't hit the same way. It's not someone stepping in to save their friend. It's someone who is kind of portrayed to have a sort of traumatic backstory that she's kind of reacting to or made to react to by the horror in the film, then kind of taking that energy onto something else.
Yeah, and that was essentially going to be my point on it, is that even the story in the comics, the Demon Bear storyline, that is pretty iconic and, regarded as a big Danny story. Like, Danny is comatose and in critical care for most of that storyline, but I think why it works so well and works well as a Danny story too is because it is based upon the relationships that she cultivated with her team already. So they're able to, fill in and stand up for her in a really satisfying way. And there's a lot of subtextual stuff there as well that works. And when they weren't able to do any of that, positive or solid character dynamic stuff or relationship building in the movie, it made the climactic sense of the Demon Bear fall flat.
It did, and it didn't look great either. I think, and I think, if you've read any of the interviews with the director, you can, the word that you used earlier, contempt, I think it's accurate towards the source material and the characters.
Well, with that parting thought, let's end on a more positive note. And for those who are interested in getting into Dani Moonstar, maybe they listened to this and they said, hey, that character seems really cool, I want to learn more. I know you've mentioned a few of the recommendations you have, but where would you recommend people go for Dani Moonstar stories?
Yeah, so I think start from the beginning. Honestly, is the best way of doing it. The New Mutants graphic novel, and then issues 1 through about 30-ish. 42, which is the story you were talking about, where she goes back to her hometown and fights the cowboy death vision, is a very interesting. So I'm not quite sure what I make of that issue and what it's trying to say, but it's an interesting issue to read. I'd read the first Valkyrie New Mutants story, not the second Asgardian one, which goes on for ages. And then probably, I don't know, I'd skip Academy X and the Volume 2 of New Mutants for sure. Not a great look for Dani. And then probably go, I'd do after that the X-Force issues that she's in, probably I think it's issue 65 through to about 80. And then 2009 run is great as well. There's some good stuff in between, not worth calling out individually, and then her era. That's where I'd go for Dani's story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for those recommendations, and thank you for joining me for this conversation today. And then thank you all for watching this video. If you made it this far, I really appreciate that. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, so any help there would be greatly appreciated. And with that, you have a great rest of your day.